Claire Carter had never been told no. Not once. Not by a board of directors who questioned her vision, not by investors who doubted her numbers, and certainly not by any man who had ever stood across from her in a negotiation room. She had built an empire worth more than $4 billion before her 35th birthday, turning a modest tech consulting firm into a global force that bore her name on buildings in 7 countries. She was the kind of woman whose schedule required 3 assistants to manage simultaneously. The kind of woman whose presence at any event shifted the entire gravity of the room. So when she found herself kneeling in a quiet autumn garden on a warm Tuesday evening, having spoken words she had never said to any human being before, and the man standing in front of her simply looked down at her with steady, careful eyes and did not say yes, Claire Carter did not know, for the first time in as long as she could remember, what to do next. Why, and what happened next, nobody expected. The man's name was William Foster. He was 38 years old. He was the least complicated and most difficult person she had ever met. And before this evening was over, he would say something to her that no boardroom, no contract, and no billion-dollar closing had ever prepared her to hear. William woke at 5 every morning without an alarm. He had done it for 7 years, since the autumn when a phone call from a hospital on the other side of the city had remade the entire architecture of his life in 4 words. His wife, Margaret, had been driving home from a late shift when a driver ran a red light on the Dale Carpenter Avenue and hit her car. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. Emma was 14 months old. William had sat in that hospital corridor for 2 hours, holding his daughter against his chest, before anyone thought to bring him a cup of coffee. He had looked down at the small, sleeping face pressed into his shoulder and understood, with a clarity that felt almost violent, that he was all there was now. He drove home in silence. He stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, and then he turned on the light and began. 7 years later, the 5 o'clock ritual was as natural as breathing. He moved through the kitchen quietly, setting water on the stove for oatmeal, slicing half a small blue plate Emma had chosen herself at the grocery store because it had a painted turtle on the rim. He packed her lunch while the oatmeal cooked, a sandwich cut diagonally, because she had told him once that triangles taste better, apple slices, a juice box, and a folded note that said something different every day, sometimes a joke, sometimes just a badly drawn dog that made her laugh every single time. He set the lunchbox by the door, sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and the newspaper, and read for exactly 20 minutes before going to wake her. The apartment was not large. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen slightly too small, a living room slightly too cluttered with Emma's art projects, which William could not bring himself to throw away. The walls held her drawings at every height she had ever been able to reach. He worked as a facilities maintenance manager at the Millbrook Commercial Center, overseeing 6 technicians who handled everything from HVAC repairs to elevator certifications. He was patient, thorough, and possessed of a mechanical intuition his supervisor called uncanny. He was not a wealthy man, but he owed nothing to anyone. No debt, no vices, no performance. He paid his rent on the 1st of every month, coached Emma's Saturday soccer team, and brought soup to his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Howerin, when she had her knee replaced in March. He was not bitter. He was not broken in any visible way. He simply seemed to have made a private arrangement with himself about the shape of his life, and within that shape, he moved with a steadiness that looked like contentment and felt, from the inside, like something he had not yet found a name for. Can you imagine carrying something that heavy and still showing up that gently for your child every single morning? The rain that Thursday evening came without much warning. By 6 o'clock, the streets of downtown were slicked and dark. Traffic backed up onto surface roads. The parking lot of Millbrook Commercial Center was nearly empty when William finished a late walkthrough of the East Wing ventilation system and crossed toward his truck with his toolbox. That's when he saw it. A low, dark car at the edge of the lot, hazard lights blinking orange against the wet pavement. The kind of car specified from a catalog, not chosen from a showroom floor. And the woman standing beside it, in a charcoal blazer, arms crossed, was clearly not someone who changed her own tires. She was on her phone, and from the rigid set of her shoulders, the conversation was not going well. William set down his toolbox and walked over. She looked at him when he approached. That brief, instinctive calculation people make when a stranger appears in a dark parking lot. assessment of threat, assessment of intent, and then something more guarded. "I've called someone," she said, by way of explanation and dismissal. "They'll be here in 45 minutes. He looked at the flat tire. He looked at the intact spare in the open trunk. 45 minutes is a long time in this rain, he said, not unkindly, and picked up the jack. She watched him for a moment, with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then she stepped aside. He worked without speaking much. At one point, he shrugged off his flannel-lined work jacket and held it out to her, without looking, up from the lug nuts. "You're going to freeze," he said. She hesitated. He could sense the hesitation without watching her, and then took it. The jacket was too large and smelled of motor oil and something warmer underneath, like cedar or old wood. She put it on without comment. When the spare was mounted and the flat was in the trunk, he stood and wiped his hands on a rag. She was already reaching into her bag. He shook his head once, simply, without making a performance of it. "No," he said. "I don't need the money." She looked at him then, with an attention that was different from before, focused, as if she were trying to solve something. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. The question was not arrogant. It was genuine, the kind of question someone asks when they be reaccustomed to their name doing particular work in a room. He considered her for a moment. The rain was easing. Her dark hair was wet at the edges, where the jacket's hood had not covered it. "Doesn't matter who you are," he said. "It's cold." He picked up his toolbox and walked back to his truck. She stood in that emptying lot in his jacket and watched him go and did not say anything else. But she would think about that sentence for the rest of the week. "It's cold." That's all he said. Nothing else. What she didn't know was, it was the truest thing anyone had said to her in years. Her assistant, Patrick, had everything within 6 hours. William Daniel Foster, age 38. Facilities maintenance manager, Millbrook Commercial Center, 9 years employed. Widower. One daughter, Emma Rose Foster, age 8, 2nd grade at Clearwater Elementary. Rental apartment on Denore Street. Truck, 11 years old, registered and insured. No criminal record. No civil suits. No debt. 3 credit cards, all with 0 outstanding balances. Volunteer soccer coach, Clearwater Community League. Known by neighbors as quiet, reliable, helpful. Known by co-workers as competent, fair, and private. Patrick had handed Claire the folder with the carefully neutral expression of someone who knows when not to have an opinion. Claire read it twice. Then she set it on the corner of her desk and looked out the window at the city spread below her. She had expected to find a seam, something running beneath the surface that would reveal, under the right pressure, a different shape than the one he showed. She had made her fortune partly by learning to find those seams, but there was nothing in William Foster's file that indicated a seam. He was exactly what he appeared to be, a man who had survived something devastating and built a life from what remained, without bitterness, without performance, without asking anyone to notice. She had spent 15 years in rooms full of men who wanted something from her. Her money, her access, her name, her time. She had developed a fluency with that particular species of wanting. William Foster had turned down her money in a parking lot in the rain and told her it was cold outside, and he had meant only that it was cold outside. She did not know what to do with that, but then something happened that changed everything. She found herself looking for reasons to be near his world, not because she had a plan, because she couldn't stop thinking about a man who pushed no agenda, carried no angle, and showed up the same way in every room. She found more reasons. A property inspection 2 blocks east of Clearwater Elementary on a Wednesday morning, which was true, and also not entirely accidental in its timing. She saw him from half a block away. The truck she recognized, the easy stride across the sidewalk, the small girl at his side in a yellow raincoat slightly too large, dragging a backpack shaped like a hedgehog. She watched him crouch at the school gate, button the top button of Emma's coat, smooth the section of her braid that had come loose, and touch her cheek, just his thumb, briefly, the gesture of someone so accustomed to this particular person that tenderness had become completely reflexive. The girl said something that made him laugh with his whole face, not a polished laugh, a private laugh, the laugh of someone genuinely delighted. He watched her through the gate until she disappeared into the building. Then he stood, and Claire, half a block away, looked away and felt something move in her chest. that she chose not to examine immediately. She had meetings that morning. She went to them, but she was elsewhere for most of them, and that had never happened before. The next time she saw him, she asked him directly, simply, the way she had noticed he communicated, whether he and his daughter would like to join her for lunch on a Saturday. He said he would ask Emma. The answer, relayed through a text message the following morning, was yes. Emma apparently had non-negotiable opinions about ice cream, and any Saturday plan would need to accommodate this. Claire said that was not a problem. It was, in fact, the most reasonable condition she had encountered in a negotiation in years. Emma Foster was 8 years old and possessed of a specific unhurried confidence Claire had not expected. She shook Claire's hand when they met outside the ice cream shop on Hartley Street with the gravity of someone concluding a formal agreement. Then she explained, without preamble, that she only liked vanilla, but that she would never tell anyone who liked other flavors that they were wrong, because her dad had told her that taste was subjective, and judging people for it was bad manners. Claire agreed this was an excellent policy. Emma considered her for a moment, with those careful eyes, and said, "You have really straight teeth." Claire told her she had worn braces for 2 years in middle school. Emma nodded seriously. "My mom was a teeth person," she said. She said it simply, without pain in it, the way children sometimes carry enormous things, not because the things aren't heavy, but because they've been helped to carry them so long that their arms have learned the weight. William, across the table, had watched this exchange with an expression that was still, but not empty. The expression of someone paying close and private attention to something they care about enormously. He caught Claire's eye for a second over Emma's head and gave a small nod that she understood to mean, "She's okay. She talks about Margaret sometimes. Don't be uncomfortable." Claire wasn't uncomfortable. She was moved, and she had not entirely planned for that. They spent the afternoon at the park 2 blocks over, where Emma had a system for the swings she explained at length. Pump exactly 6 times, reach the height where you can see the top of the pharmacy sign on the corner, then jump to the specific patch of bark between the 2 roots. William pushed her until his face was warm, and the late afternoon light made the whole park look like something out of a memory. Claire sat on the bench and watched them and thought about nothing for 20 minutes. She had not done that in longer than she could name. On the walk back, Emma slipped her hand into Claire's without comment, as if this were an ordinary thing. Claire felt the small, warm weight of it and did not say anything. She only walked. That night, back in her penthouse apartment with its clean geometric lines and city view she had never once found comforting, she sat at the kitchen island with a glass of wine and thought about a gap-toothed girl who believed taste was subjective, and a man who pushed swings with his whole body and brought soup to old women after surgery. She thought about what it felt like to sit on a bench and think about nothing. She thought about how many years it had been since she wanted something she couldn't put in a contract. The story found its way out, as stories always do. A photograph appeared, taken at the Clearwater School Fair, by someone with a phone and a news aggregator connection. Claire Carter, in a denim jacket, beside a man carrying a jar of peach jam, and a child in a Halloween costume. The image was objectively unremarkable. The story that attached itself to it was not. By Monday, every person in Claire's professional orbit had seen it. By Tuesday, the calls had begun. Marcus Holt, who chaired the board of Carter Global, called at 7 in the morning. He was tactful, he always was, but the substance was what it always was when money was involved. Perception matters. Optics are a currency. The wrong association at the wrong moment could compromise investor confidence. She heard, underneath the carefully chosen words, the older and less careful word, unworthy. Her college friend Diana called from the Hamptons and suggested, in the voice she used when trying to be gentle and was instead being condescending, that Claire was going through some kind of phase, that the pressures of running a company at her level could produce emotional responses that felt like clarity, but were actually, and here Diana used the word infatuation with the tender certainty of someone who has never been told they're wrong. A business reporter wrote a piece that asked in its headline what a woman worth $4 billion could possibly want with a maintenance worker. Claire forwarded it to her lawyer without comment. In the board meeting on Wednesday, Marcus brought it up directly. He was not unkind. He was worse than unkind. He was reasonable. He spoke of public interest in her personal life. of the ways in which associations, however innocent, had derailed corporate governance before. He spoke of William Foster in the language of accounting, what he had, what he lacked, what the arithmetic of their difference implied. She let him finish. She had learned over 15 years that letting people finish was a form of power, because it meant you had heard everything they had, and you were still standing. She set down her pen. What you're describing, she said, is a man with no debt, no criminal record, no known vices, a strong employment history, and a daughter who is kind to strangers. She paused. You're describing these as risks. The room was quiet. The man I'm worried about, she said, is someone who measures other people's worth by their bank balance. I've been in a lot of rooms with men like that. She looked at Marcus with a directness he had learned over 8 years to treat carefully. Not a single one of them has ever brought soup to a sick neighbor. She picked up her pen and moved to the next agenda item. The subject was not raised again that afternoon. She had thought about it long and carefully, which was not her usual method. She was typically decisive, but this was different. She could not model the risk in a spreadsheet. She could not run a due diligence report on whether her own heart was telling her the truth. She thought about it on airplanes, and in the back of cars, and in the silent kitchen of her apartment at night, and she came to the same place every time, that she had not been this certain of anything in years, and that she was terrified, and that the terror felt unexpectedly like proof. She took William to the garden of the Hartwell estate on the last Tuesday of November, a private property she had acquired 2 years ago, a project delayed, leaving the garden in a kind of deliberate wilderness she had come to find beautiful. The late light came in low and golden through the old oaks. The air smelled of wet earth and the last of the autumn leaves. She had not told him why they were coming, and he had not asked, which was something she had come to rely on. They walked for a while, not saying very much. Then she stopped in a clearing, where the light came through the branches in a way that looked intentional, though she knew it was only physics and chance. She turned to face him. She told him what she had rehearsed, and then abandoned the rehearsal because the practiced version had sounded like a presentation. She told him she had not known what was missing from her life until she met him, that what had been missing was not someone powerful or successful or socially compatible, but someone real, someone who showed up the same way in every room, someone who had looked at her in a rainy parking lot and seen a person who was cold, and nothing more. She told him she loved him. She told him she loved Emma, and then she did what she had never done in a boardroom, or a negotiation, or any moment in 15 years of building a world. She got down on one knee. She looked up at him, and she said, "William Foster, will you marry me?" The garden was very quiet. A bird moved in the oak branches above. The November light held them both in its long golden angle, and William looked down at her, and he did not say yes. He reached down and gently brought her to her feet. He held her hands in both of his, and looked at her for a long moment with the full, steady attention that was the most characteristic thing about him. "Claire," he said, just her name first. "You are an extraordinary woman." She felt the but before it arrived. "But I can't say yes. Not yet. Not like this." She opened her mouth, and he shook his head very slightly. "I'll only get married for one reason," he said. "Because it's love. Real love. Not because you're lonely. And I think you've been lonely for a very long time. Not because you're grateful. Not because you want to save each other from something. Those things feel like love sometimes. They're not the same thing." He paused. "And Emma." He said her name the way he always said it, like it contained something irreplaceable. "If you're going to be in her life, it can't be a decision. It can't be something you choose, because you chose me. She's already lost one person. She can't lose someone again, because they were never really sure." Claire's eyes had filled. She was not someone who cried easily, and she was crying, and she did not look away from him. "I'm not saying no," he said. His voice was quiet and deliberate, and entirely his own. "I'm saying not yet. Show me, not me. I can see you. Show Emma. Show yourself." He let go of her hands. She stood in the clearing with the tears on her face and the last of the afternoon light around her, and she understood that she had just been told the truest thing anyone had said to her in years, and that it had cost him something to say it, and that she would have to earn what she wanted, and that this was entirely fair. She did not bring up marriage again. She simply continued, which was, she was beginning to understand the whole of what he had asked. She showed up at Emma's school play in December, and sat in the third row and watched a child in a cardboard crown recite 2 lines about the winter solstice, with tremendous seriousness. She learned to make pasta from scratch, not from a chef or a class, but from a YouTube tutorial and a borrowed pasta machine, and several catastrophic failed attempts in her own kitchen, which she photographed and sent to William, who sent back a photo of Emma, laughing at the worst one. She sat with Emma, on Sunday afternoons, while William worked on the truck below the apartment window. The two of them spread across the living room floor, with markers and paper, drawing maps of imaginary countries. Emma's countries always had very specific laws. Citizens were required to own a pet. Mondays were optional. Ice cream was constitutionally free. In January, the company sent Claire to London and then Milan for 6 weeks. It would have been easy, she thought on the plane somewhere over the Atlantic, to let the distance do what distance sometimes does, to allow the practical complications of 2 lives so structurally different to make the decision for her. She could have not called. She could have let 6 weeks become a kind of quiet, unconscious answer. Instead, she called Emma every Wednesday and Friday evening, accounting for the time difference. She showed her the inside of hotel lobbies, the view from her office, overlooking the Thames, a picture of a pigeon that had walked across her meeting table. Emma showed her drawings and briefed her on a drama between 2 classmates with the seriousness of a foreign correspondent. On the 5th Wednesday, Emma had been quieter than usual. Claire asked what was wrong. Emma looked at the camera for a long moment and then said, quietly, "I miss you, Mama Claire." Claire had pressed her lips together, breathed carefully, and said, "I miss you too, sweetheart. I'll be home soon." She hung up and sat for a long time in her London hotel room, looking at nothing. What she was feeling was not complicated. It was simple, in the way that only the most important things are simple. When she told William what Emma had said, he was standing in the kitchen making coffee. He was quiet for several seconds. He looked at the mug in his hand, then at the family photograph on the refrigerator, Margaret and himself and Emma at the beach, Emma in a sun hat, Margaret laughing at something off camera. He held the mug in both hands for a long moment, in the way he did when he was working something through. He did not say anything specific, but something in the quality of his silence had shifted, and Claire, who had become fluent in his silences, understood that he was no longer waiting. They were at Riverside Park on a Saturday afternoon in early April, the same park where Emma had taken her hand on the walk back to the car that first afternoon. Emma was at the swings. The light was the clean light of early spring, the sky a washed and certain blue, the grass just come back to itself after the winter. William had been quieter than usual all afternoon. Not dramatically, he was always quiet, but there was something in the quality of it that made Claire pay close attention. He had been reaching for his jacket pocket and stopping himself, twice. She had noticed. She had not asked. She had waited. He said her name. She turned. He was already down on one knee. He looked up at her with the same steady, careful eyes she had first seen in a wet parking lot more than a year ago. "There's something I should have said a long time ago," he said. "But I needed to be sure. Not of you. I was sure of you. I needed to be sure of me." He opened a small box. The ring inside was not elaborate. Silver, simple, with a single stone that caught the April light. "Emma and I talked about this," he said. "She helped me pick it." His voice was even and quiet, the voice he always used, and it was more beautiful to her than any speech she had ever been given. "Last November, you asked me a question, and I couldn't answer it yet. I've been carrying the answer for a while now. I think it's time I gave it to you." He looked at her directly. "I love you, Claire. Not the version of you that runs the company, or manages the board, or knows how to make every room pay attention. You, the one who watches Emma sleep and worries about whether she's eating enough vegetables, and called her every Wednesday from London because you knew she needed to hear your voice." He paused. "Emma loves you, and this small family of mine, we need you in it." He took a breath. "Will you marry us?" Behind him at the swings, Emma had stopped pumping and was watching with her gap-toothed smile, so wide it seemed too large for her face, and she was also unmistakably about to cry, and trying not to, which was the most William thing she had ever done. Claire looked from him to her and back to him, and she said yes. She said it without hesitation and without performance, which was not how she said most things, and it felt like the most natural sentence she had ever constructed. He stood and put the ring on her hand. She held his face and kissed him, and Emma came off the swings at a full run and hit both of them at approximately the same moment, with the force of an 8-year-old who had been waiting for this conclusion for as long as she had understood it was a possibility. They stood there in the April light, the three of them tangled together in the middle of the park, and William had both arms around both of them, and his eyes were closed, and his face was the face of a man who has everything he needs. They were married in June, in the same garden where Claire had knelt in the November light. It was not a grand wedding. Claire could have made it grand, could have filled that garden with every name that mattered in her world. She did not. There were 41 people in attendance. Her mother, who arrived in the dress she had been saving since Claire finished her MBA, Mrs. Howard from next door, delivered by a car Claire had arranged, sitting in a garden chair with her cane and her good dress, and an expression of deep personal satisfaction. Emma stood between them during the ceremony in a yellow dress she had chosen herself, white shoes, already scuffed on the garden path, her hair braided back with small white flowers that Claire had put there that morning, both of them reflected in the mirror, Emma watching Claire's hands in the particular way she had of observing things she wanted to learn. When it was done and they were married, Emma looked up at both of them with the full gravity of the occasion, and then said, at a volume perhaps not entirely intended to carry as far as it did, "Now I have a mom." Then, slightly quieter, with the gap-toothed smile, "Can we have cake now?" The laughter that came from 41 people simultaneously, in a garden on a June afternoon, was the sound William Foster would recall in years to come when anyone asked him what the best day of his life had felt like. He would not describe the light, or the flowers, or the ring on Claire's hand. He would describe the laughter, and the way Emma had stood between them afterward with one hand in each of theirs, looking up at the sky with the expression of someone who has settled, conclusively, a question that has been open for a long time. What Claire Carter had built over 15 years was considerable. She had built it from intelligence and determination, and the willingness to outwork every person in every room she had ever entered. But what she had not been able to build, in 15 years of relentless building, was the thing she had found in a parking lot in the rain. She had not been able to build it because it was not the kind of thing that gets built by one person. It gets built the way families get built, out of choice and persistence and the accumulated weight of ordinary moments and the willingness to show up again and again, not because the contract requires it, because the people require it, because you have become the kind of person who cannot imagine not showing up, because somewhere along the way the choice became something more permanent than choice. William had known this already, not by reasoning his way to it, but by having lived it, by having stood in a dark kitchen 7 years ago and turned on the light and begun. He had tried to tell her this in a November garden, and she had been smart enough and honest enough to hear him. Emma, for her part, had known it longest of all. Children often do. They know who stays,